Hey, what's up? It's GC Kinsey, and I'm going to be talking about some of the most common misconceptions about asexuality. Back in 2017, I made a mini comic called Asexuality Is Not, which is linked below in the description. And the reason I drew this is because after I came out as asexual, I started noticing this pattern of a lot of people kind of misunderstanding what that was or mixing it up with a few things that are kind of similar but not quite the same. So I just wanted to put some information out there to clear that up. And now for Ace Day of Visibility 2021, I want to do something a little special by turning the content of that comic into a video. This is just going to give me a chance to go more in depth into that material without being limited by things like the size of a page or the number of images allowed in a post. Even though that comic and this video are about what asexuality is not, I want to start by explaining what asexuality is, just for those of you who are unfamiliar. Asexuality is an umbrella term encompassing a spectrum of people who experience little to no sexual attraction. On that spectrum, there are asexuals who experience no sexual attraction, and also gray asexuals who might experience sexual attraction very rarely or only under specific circumstances, or maybe they're just not sure what sexual attraction is. Within that gray area, there are a lot of specific identity labels that people might use. A lot of people in the community will also use the word ace as shorthand, either for asexual or being somewhere on that asexual spectrum. Oftentimes when we come out as ace, we have to explain what that means, because the average person is probably familiar with gay, straight, and bi, but they've never really heard of this orientation. And even if they have, it's pretty typical for them to misunderstand it or get it mixed up with other things, so that's why I want to clear all of that up right now. Just a quick note that if you are following along with the comic, the information is presented in a different order here just because it flowed better for video. Different mediums have different ways of presenting things more effectively, but all the information is still there, plus a little extra here in this video. So here we go. 8 things that asexuality is not. 1. Asexuality is not fake. Wait, asexual? There's no way that's a real thing, right? Come on, everybody wants sex. That's like a basic human instinct. Nope, I don't believe you. You're just making that up for attention. Actually, asexuality is very much a real thing, just like any other sexual orientation. If you're not ace, it may be a little hard to wrap your mind around. I can't speak from personal experience, but I have heard that sexual attraction is a very powerful thing, so I can understand why it might blow your mind when you find out that some of us just don't feel it. But there are a lot more people on the asexual spectrum than you might think. We're estimated at about 1% of the population, and that's a conservative estimate. There aren't really a lot of studies out there about asexuality, and therefore not a lot of accurate statistics. But even if we are only 1%, that's still 7.9 million people. That's a lot of aces. Do you really think that many people, most of whom have never met each other and couldn't coordinate about this, would make our orientation up? I know sex is pervasive across human history and culture, whether it's as the subject of art and music and media, whether it's as the oldest profession in the world, sex work, or as a marketing tool used to sell all kinds of products, or as a taboo subject that people use to shame and repress each other. But that doesn't mean that sexual attraction is a universal experience. And it doesn't mean that those of us who don't experience sexual attraction are faking it or making it up. One of the biggest reasons we talk about our orientation and have come up with language around it in the first place is because sex is so powerful and prevalent in our society that as aces, that can make us feel like there's something wrong with us. More on that in the next point. 2. Asexuality is not a disorder. Asexuality? Oh my god, I can't imagine having that. That must be so hard. I think there's a pill that can fix that. Or maybe therapy would help. Sounds like sexual dysfunction to me. You should really go get that checked out. This is some of the well-meaning but ill-informed concern you might be subjected to if you come out as ace. A lot of people who don't realize or understand that it's an orientation might mistake it for a disorder that needs to be cured, so something like low libido or sexual dysfunction. They might attribute it to your diet, any medications you're on, or any other physical or mental health conditions that you might have. But the truth is, you can't cure asexuality any more than you can cure being gay, for example. People have been trying that for years by way of a thing called conversion therapy, which is not only completely ineffective, but has also been declared as inhumane by many, many human rights organizations and medical associations. Asexuality doesn't require any kind of treatment because, just like being gay, it's an orientation, not a disorder. Of course, there are people who seek treatment for sexual dysfunction or low libido or any other medical conditions that impede their ability to enjoy sex, and that is totally fine and legit. But those are not the same thing as asexuality. They're not about sexual attraction. They're about things like sex drive and sexual sensation. To determine whether a patient actually is dealing with some sort of sexual disorder or is just asexual, doctors will sometimes ask questions like, is this an issue that's making you unhappy? Is it something you want to fix? Or are you happy with it just the way you are? That's because you can be happy and healthy and ace, whereas if you have a disorder, it's more likely to be something that's disrupting your life and something that you want to fix. Of course, if the doctor is not aware of asexuality, which many are not, then it's likely to just get classified as a disorder after all. There's an issue with this diagnostic approach. A lot of aces aren't happy as we are. Not because our asexuality is a problem that needs to be solved, but because we live in a society that treats us like we're broken. Or if we don't know what asexuality is, we might feel like we're broken. So instead of personal happiness, a better metric doctors might use to distinguish asexuality from sexual disorders is asking about the patient's experience with sexual attraction. 3. Asexuality is not celibacy. You're ace? You mean you've never had sex before? Like, ever? How do you know till you've tried it? Wait, you have tried it? Then how can you really be ace? Just like people mistake asexuality for a disorder, they also get it mixed up with celibacy or abstinence. These are two different words that have slightly different connotations but basically mean the same thing. You're not having sex. With abstinence, there's more of an implication that you're just sort of waiting to have sex until the right time, whereas with celibacy, it's kind of associated more with things like taking a vow. Maybe it's for personal or religious reasons, but it's more of kind of a permanent saying no to sex, but either way, there's no sex happening. This is different from asexuality because it's not about sexual attraction, it's about sexual behavior. We have a common saying in the ace community, which is, action is not attraction. And that 100% applies here. Whether or not you feel sexual attraction for others versus whether or not you have sex with others are two different things. Your sexual attraction or lack thereof isn't a choice, but your sexual behavior is. Can you be both asexual and celibate or abstinent? Of course. But you can also be any other orientation and choose not to have sex with people as well. It's not limited to asexuality, and there's no correlation. And on the flip side, an asexual person can have sex with someone else if they want. You don't have to be sexually attracted to someone in order to have sex with them. Just ask any sex worker. And there are a number of reasons why an asexual person might still engage in sexual activity. Maybe they're curious about what it's like. Maybe they think it physically feels good even if the attraction isn't there. Maybe they do it to make their partner happy. Maybe they're some form of gray ace and they do experience some minimal amount of sexual attraction that motivates them to have sex. Maybe they tried it before they knew they were ace, and that was kind of how they figured it out. There's a frustrating catch-22 where people will say, don't knock it till you've tried it, but then use it to invalidate our asexuality if we do. Bottom line, some aces choose to have sex while others don't. It's our lack of sexual attraction that we have in common, not our sexual behavior. 4. Asexuality is not sex repulsion. Oh, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot this movie had a sex scene in it. You hate that kind of thing, right? Oh, you might not want to go over there. That's the naughty books section. Oh my god, did you just make a sex joke? But you're ace! There's a strange thing that can happen when you come out as ace. People hear the word asexual and interpret it as antisexual, as if that prefix a means anti or against rather than without, as in without sexual attraction. So that leads them to getting asexuality mixed up with a whole different thing called sex repulsion. Your sexual orientation describes how you experience sexual attraction to other people, but there's a whole other set of terminology around how you feel about sex in general. And on that scale, we have sex favorable, which means that you're cool with the idea of sex. Sex indifferent, which means you don't really care. And sex repulsed, which means you're disgusted by the idea of sex. If someone is sex repulsed, sex is just gross to them, and that's totally fine. So these people more likely would be against things like having sex, consuming media with sex scenes or sexual content, probably wouldn't be likely to make sex jokes. But sex repulsion isn't the same thing as asexuality. It's actually separate from any sexual orientation. So for example, you could be gay and sex indifferent, bi and sex repulsed, pan and sex favorable, straight and sex indifferent, ace and sex favorable, and so on. Any combination is possible. There's no direct correlation that says anyone who's asexual is also going to be sex repulsed. An asexual person can be sex favorable, sex indifferent, or sex repulsed. It all comes down to the individual in question. So being ace doesn't necessarily mean that you hate sex, that you find it disgusting, that you don't ever want to talk about it or hear about it, or that you'll cover your eyes and run screaming when it pops up on your television. But because so many people get asexuality and sex repulsion mixed up, it can lead to those kinds of awkward situations where people think they need to protect their ace friends from any sort of exposure to sexual media. It can also make it harder for aces to figure out that they're ace if they're also sex favorable. Sex favorability can feel kind of like a contradiction to asexuality, even though that's not the case. 5. Asexuality is not innocence. You're ace? Wow, you're like so pure. Aw, you're so sweet and innocent. Are you sure you're ace? I mean, maybe you're still just too young and inexperienced to know. There's a lot to unpack about this particular misconception and what it says about societal views not only of asexuals but of sex in general. There are a lot of value judgments attached to sexual behavior. Who it's okay to have sex with, when it's okay to have sex with them, what kind of sex it's okay to have, etc. And in some cultures, including Western society with its heavy Judeo-Christian influence, there's an emphasis around associating sex with starting a family. For cisgender heterosexual married couples trying to procreate, sex is considered good, while other forms of sex, such as casual sex, premarital sex, queer sex, sex work, are considered bad. And as such, a lack of sexual experience, often described as your innocence or your virginity, is considered pure and virtuous. At least until you get married, then it's time to give it up and start cranking out some babies. There are, of course, all kinds of problems with this. First of all, there are double standards around all of these morals about sex that more heavily impact women and also people who are not women but were assigned female at birth. But also, when you equate sexual inexperience with purity, then that implies that sexual experience makes you impure, which I personally think is just gross and judgmental. As long as everything is consensual for all parties involved, having sex does not make you a bad person. So that's one thing, but what about the problem specifically with associating innocence with asexuality? Well, as we learned previously, action is not attraction. Asexual doesn't mean sex repulsed, and it doesn't mean celibate. And there are some aces who do have sexual experience, so calling aces innocent based on a perceived lack of sexual experience is inaccurate. Even worse, the assumption that aces are sexually inexperienced can lead people to infantilize us. Maybe they think asexuality is just a young person thing, a phase that you go through until you figure out what your real orientation is. Or if you're an older ace, people might talk about how sweet and cute and childlike it is that you've never had sex before, whether that's actually true or not. Either way, they're calling your maturity into question because they're equating it with sexual inexperience. But that lack of sexual experience isn't the same as a lack of sexual attraction. And whether or not you engage in sexual behavior says nothing about your maturity or your morality. Being ace doesn't make someone more innocent or pure, whatever that means, than anyone else. 6. Asexuality is not aromanticism. Wait, what? You're in a relationship? But I thought you were ace. If you're ace, then why do you have a dating profile? It's so sad that you can't love anyone. Let's talk about different kinds of attraction. Sexual attraction is when you have a strong urge or pull toward having sex with someone. Romantic attraction is when you have that urge to date someone or be romantically involved. Sensual attraction is when you have that urge to touch someone in a non-sexual manner, so maybe things like snuggling or holding hands. Aesthetic attraction is when you have that pull towards someone's appearance and you just really want to look at them, or maybe draw them. Platonic attraction is when you have that strong urge to get to know someone and become their friend. And there are a lot of other types of attraction, but these are just some of the most common ones. This distinction between different types of attraction, rather than thinking of attraction as just one sort of big nebulous thing, is known as the split attraction model. It's a tool that might help you understand your orientation a little bit better, especially if some of the different ways that you experience attraction don't quite match up. When people use the split attraction model, you might hear them describe their orientation as something romantic, something sexual. For example, homoromantic bisexual, panromantic heterosexual, biromantic asexual. You get the idea. You can use any combination of orientation prefixes such as homo, hetero, bi, pan, a, etc. to describe how you experience both sexual and romantic attraction, or any other type of attraction. Just those two are the ones people most often use to talk about their orientation. And that starts to get into the two things that are being conflated here. Asexual, or a lack of sexual attraction, is different from aromantic, or a lack of romantic attraction. You can be both asexual and aromantic, but you can also be asexual and have any other kind of romantic orientation. Or you can be aromantic and have any kind of sexual orientation. So why do people get these mixed up? I think it's because the idea that your sexual and romantic orientations are always going to be in alignment is sort of the dominant narrative in society. That if you're heterosexual, you're also going to be hetero-romantic, that if you are bisexual, you're also going to be biromantic, and so on. So from there, you can see how people might think if you are asexual, you're also going to be aromantic, but that's simply not the case. So assuming that just because someone is asexual means that they don't want to date or have a relationship doesn't make sense. And furthermore, just because someone is aromantic, that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to date or have relationships either. Aromanticism exists on a spectrum just like asexuality. So just as there are gray aces, there are gray arrows, and they may experience that sort of limited romantic attraction that motivates them to want to engage romantically with someone. And also remember, because action is not attraction, there are some aromantic folks who do still have romantic relationships. I also want to make it really clear in this point that attraction is not the same thing as love. And a lack of attraction, be it sexual, romantic, or otherwise, doesn't mean that you can't love someone. Love exists in many, many forms. So the idea that asexuals or aromantics can't experience love and therefore have these sad, unfulfilling lives is simply not true. 7. Asexuality is not an automatic rejection. Oh, you're ace? But I thought you wanted to be with me. I guess I just must have been reading things wrong. What do you mean you're ace? So you're breaking up with me? Wait, why did you agree to go out with me if you were just gonna tell me you were ace? This point is kind of an expansion of the previous one, because a lot of times, even if folks do understand that asexual and aromantic are different things, they still get hung up on this idea that coming out as ace to someone that you are dating or talking to is a way of rejecting them. That it basically means, well, I'm never gonna have sex with you, so I'm just gonna go ahead and nip this thing we've got going on in the bud. But that's not what it means at all. If your partner or crush comes out to you as ace, it's because they wanted to share an important part of their life with you, and maybe also figure out what that means in terms of your compatibility together. Just because one person is ace and another person is not, doesn't mean they can't make compatible relationship partners. So how does that work? Well, it really depends on the people in question. Maybe the partners decide to have a romantic relationship, but not a sexual one. Maybe they decide to have a QPR, that's a queer platonic or quasi-platonic relationship, which is a kind of relationship that's platonic in nature, but it's different from friendship and that there typically is a more serious commitment involved. Maybe the ace person is sex favorable or sex indifferent and is willing to engage in sexual behavior to make their partner happy. Maybe the partners reach a compromise on sex where some activities are off the table but others are totally fine. Maybe they have an open relationship where the non-ace partner can seek out sex with other people if the ace partner isn't interested in doing that. There really is a huge variety of ways that people might handle this. It all comes down to communicating openly about your wants and your boundaries and then determining whether you're compatible. Someone's asexuality might end up being a deal breaker in a relationship, but it isn't guaranteed to be. So if your partner or crush comes out as ace, don't take that as a sign you need to leave. Take it as a sign you need to talk and then go from there. I've heard some people ask, why don't aces just date each other and take everybody else out of the equation? Well, for one, even though there are 7.9 million aces in the world, we're still a small minority in the general population, so only dating each other would really cut down on our available pool. But two, sex is only one part of what makes people compatible in a relationship. Having the same sexual orientation as your partner doesn't mean that you'll be compatible. And there are partners with different sexual orientations that have successful relationships all the time. So it's always better to talk things through and figure out your compatibility as individuals rather than making assumptions. 8. Asexuality is not one size fits all. Now that I've gone through a lot of the most common misconceptions about aces, I want to wrap up with one final point. There's no one way to be ace. Just like any other minority group, we are not a monolith. We're just a bunch of people that happen to have one thing in common. It's typical for any group to have stereotypes about it, most of which are based on misunderstandings, exaggerations, or just plain untruths. The stereotypes around aces are that we're mostly young, mostly white, mostly women. We tend to be shy, reserved, introverted, modest, nerdy, and we're not interested in any type of relationship other than friendship. But this is far from the truth. I mean, heck, I am living proof that most of these stereotypes are untrue. The only ones that are true for me are that I'm white and nerdy. And there are plenty more aces out there who disprove these stereotypes as well. We come in all shapes and sizes and ages and races from all kinds of cultural backgrounds and walks of life. We have all kinds of different experiences. At the beginning of this video, I explained that asexuality is an umbrella term that encompasses a spectrum, and I think that's super important to remember here. Just like aces have our differences as people, we also all experience our asexuality in different ways. We all fall along that ace spectrum at different points. One thing I want to mention for those of you who are questioning whether you might be ace, there's a tendency to feel like you have to fit a label 100% in order to count. So when you're questioning, you might be reading things like, you might be asexual if, and then it lists a whole bunch of bullet points of different experiences that you might have. And you might worry about what it means if you don't check all of those boxes, but they're just throwing a bunch of stuff at you to see if you relate to any of it, not necessarily all of it. It's not a checklist of criteria you have to meet in order to be able to call yourself ace. Labels should help you understand yourself better, not dictate who you are or force you into a box. If you're ace, then you're ace, and no matter what experiences you do or don't have, your asexuality is still just as valid. And that wraps up our list of things that asexuality is not. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it cleared up some misconceptions you might have had, and it gave you some new information that you didn't know. If you still have any questions, please feel free to drop those below in the comments. And if you are a fellow ace, I would love to hear from you too. Have you ever had people make awkward assumptions about you because they mistook your asexuality for something else? Have you ever had to define or explain what your orientation means? Let me know. If you want to hit me up with any of your questions or comments on other social media, I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, please feel free to check out my other videos. I have more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person. I have cosplay music videos and makeup tutorials, so like and subscribe, make sure you don't miss anything new. And thank you so much for watching and for your support. All right, I'll see you on the next one.